to start because we're having a typical IT problem with these things. Interactive storytelling. We started doing it at CIJ a few years ago, and the reason being is that investigative journalism faces many problems, but one of them is fatigue from the audience. So people can only hear so many desperately important but quite dry or very sad or very complex stories. And people would probably watch it Panorama on Monday or maybe something on Tuesday, but come Friday nobody wants to hear about it. So investigative journalism always fought with this problem of how to sell itself to the audience. And when I first came across web docs at a conference in Italy, and I was sitting there thinking, oh my goodness, this is surely the way forward. And sure enough, it did start to develop and things improved for investigatives and just general interactive storytelling. The key thing about it is interactivity. So the audience doesn't just sit back and watch it, or just has to read a massive big text, because investigative stories tend to be huge and complex. Online, nobody wants to read online. It's something that you can interact with, and that's what seems to keep people going. Sort of the usual, this is not official statistics, this is something we got from our speakers from The Guardian and New York Times at our annual summer school, is they say that on average people spend about 1.5 minutes on an online story. On average, that's what people are clicking for a second and reading the whole through. With interactives, people are willing to invest more times. Up to 15 to 17 minutes on average. And that's again with people just having a look and letting it go and spending the whole thing. Lots of time on it. So that's a massive increase, absolutely massive increase. So your impact immediately going to be bigger and better because people are spending more time with it. And when you play with it, it's almost like a game, it's quite addictive. My favorite interactives, what I do, I play with them during my lunch break. Most people spend their lunchtime at the computer. They don't particularly want to work as such. They'll check an email or two, but they want something to keep their minds, and they play. I mean, this is a perfect example. And since then, I mean, the interactive started happening since 1997, which I don't know where I've been all this time. But it's basically filmmaking started as a film format. The filmmakers got frustrated with linear storytelling and formats of commercial documentaries of 50 minutes and 10 minutes for adverts, and they thought, okay, hang on a minute, we just want to do something different. So there were no platforms, nothing for it, so they started doing it with PowerPoints. As you know, with PowerPoints you could cut a slide, and then there could be a video, and then another slide could link to a slide later on. You don't have to do it in a linear format. And then various programs off the shelf appeared, and the genre is so new, there is no name for it. We call it web docs, some people call it iDocs, other people call it interactive factuals. It's kind of interaction, that's what keeps them together, and obviously the best thing is to show you one, which I can't at the moment. Maybe when I see there's a positive sign with the finger there. And the beauty of it is this: they can be done cheaply, they can be done expensively as well. I mean, you can do pretty much anything expensively. But you can sort of, as a sole reporter with a small organization, you can kind of slightly jazz up your stories. Not just with simple links, but with a bit of imagination and a bit of it can be done on a budget. The documentary which inspired me was done about 7 years ago now, and it was to celebrate 10 years of the fall of the Berlin Wall. Is it 10 years? No, 15 years of the fall of the Berlin Wall, called the Iron Curtain Diaries. And it was a group of 4 filmmakers. Well, it's actually more than filmmakers. It was one filmmaker, photographer, designer, and someone else. They went on a road trip down the Berlin Wall, and they kind of videoed it. They done it for 20,000 euros, which in the filmmaking documentaries budgets is not very much. And it was so innovative and so exciting that they toured it with festivals. They actually made the money back and made 6,000 euros on top of it, which is kind of, for a film done on with their own money, is pretty good. I mean, there are of course web docs that cost hundreds of thousands of pounds, take months to do, obviously. But you can do it cheaply. What we teach at CIJ, the thing is with web docs is that you have to have the minimum of 3 people really working on it. A storyteller, a designer, and a coder or developer. That's sort of your minimum thing, and the difference is you can't write a story and then go to a designer and then go to developer. This is not how it works. You kind of all 3 have to sit together from the start and start thinking about it. What's the story? What format do we want to make it with? And that sort of dictates what sort of photography you take if it's photographic, what sort of footage you take if it's footage, how much text you need, all of that. However, obviously, coders, designers, you may get maybe a student designer willing to give it a shot, but coders are expensive. Coders make money. So they're not going, I mean, unless they're utterly bored of their mind, they're not going to sort of volunteer their time, although some do. En masse, they're not going to volunteer their time for this sort of thing. So what we teach is a very user-friendly tool called Calland, and it basically allows you to put together on your own a web doc. It works sort of on the principles of Final Cut Pro, but not as complex. I mean, I've seen Final Cut Pro and it's a bit oof. While Calland is very user-friendly, I mean, you can learn it in a day. We basically have people come for a day course, they come back to their organizations, and in like 4 weeks they create a web doc. And the most thing that takes them lots of time is actually getting their videos in the right format. Putting it together is not that difficult. That's what we try to do. We try to encourage people to think interactive. I will, once we're online, show you a few really good examples of expensive and not so expensive ones, and you will see also that lots of stories now, what 3 years ago would have been unthinkable, are now sort of a standard form to tell them. Things move, pictures appear, photographs change. It's not just a passive. Basically what we want to move away from is from passive watching or listening or reading into an active process. And one of our, that speaker, she's called Glyn Thomas, who attended our course and came back and did a web doc, which we were pretty impressed with actually. What he said, he did it for a charity, and the charity was a fundraising exercise for them. They wanted to talk about mining in Indonesia and how banks are sponsoring it, and they wanted action. So they wanted people to either sign a petition or donate or tweet about it or blah, 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 blah. And normally they just put a press release or a little video and they get very little response. With that web doc, and it was pretty crude. I mean, you know, it's the first one he's ever done. It's not the most amazing interactive you'll see, and yet, with that pretty crude web doc, they managed to have 10% response from people, which is pretty high. It's there and then, either donating or signing petitions or doing things. So it springs people into action because you get this feeling. It's a computer game. You're kind of in charge. You play with it. It's much more sort of fun than a normal passive viewing. So yeah, it was done in 2009. There we go. Fairly old. So basically, it's very old, so it's quite old-fashioned, but you will see what a sort of, this really summarizes it. So you kind of go in, it looks like a website. And this is Honecker saying that the wall is going to stand forever in 50 years and 100 years and blah, blah, blah. Wishful thinking. And then what you get, once you move in, is a map. And you will see that there are these flashing lights. And what you can do is to click on them. And it takes you places. So it shows you Murmansk, which is in Russia. And then at the bottom, there are various, again, active videos. And you go on them. And it takes you there. So you can have a look at what's happening there. And it can be video. It doesn't have to be video. Some of it is just pictures. It has sound, it kind of gives you an idea of being there, and you can choose what you do, where you go, what you look at. And what really inspired me about this is lots of stories in investigative journalism are about data. And data, most often represented on maps, And it's basically, you know, there was a particular story one of our graduates did. It was about investigation in Northern Ireland, about how quick the ambulances in Northern Ireland get to the place of the casualty. And some took 4 minutes, some took 17 minutes, etc. So what she did, she initially just put all this data on the Google map and had this little Google map, this little boring little, you know, these little bubbles that Google Map gives you of what the thing is. What they also had, they had addresses of all those people, so they went and interviewed them and showed what a difference the length of the ambulance response made to their casualty, their illness. So think of this story and think about this map, how it can, you can tell this story by showing the map of Northern Ireland with different counties, parishes, and then you click on it and you get pictures of people who actually were involved in it. It's much more interesting way of telling the story than just using a map with pictures, with numbers and a very long explanation of how it's devastating, la-di-da-di-da. What I wanted to show you as well is, so this is the documentary that was done on the cheap, and they even made money. Very old though. There is another one I'm going to show you. This is really primarily for just to give you a scope of what the things you can achieve. This is a very arty, very interesting documentary web doc done by Canadian filmmakers called Out of My Window. It was funded by the National Film Board of Canada, who spent a lot of money on these things, and they really pride themselves on interactives. This is a few years old again, and this is really one of my favorites, my pastime at lunch. I'm telling my colleagues. You can basically look into people's windows in different locations around the world. I'm not going to bore you with lots of it, but I'll just show you the kind of the logic of it. Again, it has sound. So it gives you buildings, and each window is an active window. You go around them, you can click on them, and it takes you into this person's house. And let's choose this one. And what you can do is you can walk around it and see what's there, and all the active bits. So you can see, you can click on that. There's Chap City. Once you click on that, it takes you to a story. And this person tells something, and you see other stuff. So, or there's music. I mean, it's almost endless what it offers you, because every bit of your screen becomes a button, and you can.
We have many people who work in the complex. We also have.
And it takes you around. You feel your presence there. I also wanted to show you a recent one, which is sort of technically not a web doc, but it takes this idea of web docs. What I wanted to show you is a sort of story which ordinarily would have been just a story, but the influence of interactives, how it changed it into something different. Just recently there was a big leak of documents about drones, and The Intercept published a story about it. Even a few years ago, probably even last year, the drone papers, it would have just been a big story. But look at it now. Huh? Fun! Well, not fun with drones, but look at the interface. And it already is much more interesting, much more almost touchable. And you know, residents talk. Things happen as you read the text. There is a menu on the left where you can go from A to B, C. If you're kind of a bit bored of this, it can take you to another place. This is a normal journalistic story, which would have been just a big long text with a few pictures, which is now, because of interactives and because they figured out that interactives is the way forward, that's where it's going. I mean, stuff that's happening. You see, you can have sort of pictures, big slides of information, and you know, photography suddenly off screen. It's almost like a magazine, but on your screen. So hopefully I sold you the idea a bit. What you need to think about it, there's one crucial thing about it when you do these stories. It's not a journalistic linear way of doing it. You need to think about it as a product. Okay, we hate the word product, it's commercial and all this sort of stuff, but it is a product. You need sort of the format, the story justifies format. So you don't just go for all these bells and whistles for no reason. You need to think of who is going to be reading it. If you're aiming at teenagers, don't make a desktop version. They're not going to be reading it on desktop, they're going to be reading it on their phones. You may want it as an app. You may want your interactive to be an app rather than a online-based kind of website-y type of thing. If you want to do the elderly, well, maybe you do want to go on big screen, on desktop screens, because they may not be. I don't know what your grands are like, but mine isn't exactly good with a small screen. You can't see anything. So that's sort of what you need to do. So you need to think of everything. You need to think of it as a product. Who is your audience? Who is going to be consuming it? What are they likely to want to use? What's the best way of telling the story? Don't make it gimmicky for the sake of it. You need to almost do most of the thinking at the start. And then the rest is execution, as opposed to you start doing the story and you kind of get through the process, you figure out what the format needs to be. You kind of need to think of, it's top heavy. You need to think of everything at the beginning and then you start doing it. So I hope you will play around with our WebDocs guide and look at lots and lots and lots of things and all the things that's possible to do, and hopefully get inspired and hopefully start doing your own ones. And tell me if you do, because we want to make it mainstream. We want to have much more of this stuff. And we will, especially if it's investigative, we'll gladly talk about it in our newsletters, website and stuff. So yes, there we are. If you have any questions. Yes?
So I'm a documentary filmmaker, and there's in that world there's a lot of buzz around web docs and what have you, but so far my impression is that unless it's associated with a feature film, it's very, or you're Canadian, it's very difficult to actually get funding for these sorts of projects. I'm wondering, from a journalistic perspective, is that maybe you're operating with different sources?
I mean, if you think films are difficult to fund, try journalism. It's pretty difficult. I mean, there are lots of funds that fund it. What I'm trying to say is that you can, it won't be all bells and whistles, but you can probably do it with your own devices, not that expensively. And the reason these first guys had done it so well is because it was a team of 4 of them who were friends, who were all committed, and they were willing to put their skills, so they obviously worked for free. The costs that were associated with it was to travel or to get, I think the most expensive thing they said was software. So if you have the right team, you can, I mean, I'm not saying that it's easy. It's very difficult. The same with journalism. I mean, investigative journalism takes forever to do, and editors hate it because, as one of our speakers says, you spend like years digging in the garbage to maybe find a jewel. So yes, its funding is the same thing. But we hopefully, I mean, that's why we use Clint, because there's no point of teaching people how to do this coding and stuff. It's just too expensive. So we try to do like entry level.
But how long does it take you to make one of those things, one of the story, like
Well,
the Windows one? It takes ages, like the Windows example.
Yeah, I mean, that was such a huge budget, and it was proper huge production. I mean, that's just for inspiration. I'm not suggesting you'll go and do it.
Yes.
Well, this project, it's part of a bigger even project. So Out of My Window is part of the bigger project called High Rise. It was a collaborative project with, between the film board and residents of various high rises. So some residents made videos and sent it to them. I mean, it took for like a 4-year project.
Yes, precisely. It looks like a long-term project, almost like a feature film. If we are thinking of everyday stories, local stories, Is it feasible to documentary?
Well, what The Guardian is doing, so okay, if you want one more, I'll show you another one, which is, what The Guardian is doing, what they've done is they've done their first ever documentary. It was the firestorm, you know that thing about in Australia when the family was sitting in the water while their house was burning with 4 grandchildren? You probably do, but anyway, they made that story into a webdoc, and then just every other webdoc, they used the same structure, they just put different content in. They're trying to mainstream it, and I think that's the way forward. So if you're a small media outlet, you do a frame, almost like a website, and then you refill with content. Let me show you this one. And this is a very good story. Environment, right? Hard to read, hard to tell, hard to sell. Everything about it is very, very hard. And yet still, it's a beautiful thing. Cold War. Sorry. Drilling well in the Arctic. There we go. Look how nice is that. You see, it sort of looks like a normal story, and then you start scrolling down. And things start happening. Look, the text moves while the picture doesn't. Then boom! Look at that! It's like children's books. It's like it's Harry Potter. You know, you walk past and the pictures move. That's brilliant, huh?
In the reader control how the text moves?
Yeah, I'm controlling the so I'm scrolling it up and down, and you see that. And what they did, this is a template. They did 3 of those, the same template, and they did a series about it. So that's how you mainstream it. I mean, that's how you cast costs. You have a very good template to start with, work on it hard. Oh yes, another thing, because it's a product, you don't just like work at home and then ba-bam, produce it and show to people. You'll fail. You need to fail quickly. So you do a prototype and then go and test it. And if it doesn't work, go back and redo it, because it's a game. It's not just a story. Nobody can change it. If you have to interact as an audience, the audience has to understand how it works. It needs to be logical. They need to understand why they need to be bothered. So you kind of need to test it at various stages throughout the process, which is, again, for journalism, most certainly is very weird. Normally, they look, you know, journalists lock themselves up in a dark room and write stories and then produce it and hoping for the best. And the same as filmmakers, I'm sure, you know, you kind of sit in the editor's suite and then hope that it will be okay. Well, here you need to kind of like go to university, test it on students, go to Starbucks, test it there. You like random people, buy them a drink, and you then will know whether what you think is a genius idea is actually working or not. So that's another kind of completely different mindset. Yeah, any more questions? Yes?
You said the rates of that people spend longer on it, but do fewer people go towards it than a regular news story?
It is not a news story, it's a feature story. With all these stories, that would be like a magazine story. So yes and no. Yes, they do. Yes, there are fewer because this is not breaking news. But breaking news happened and gone. This is a story where you would spend time on. So think of it as more magazine-y rather than breaking news. I mean, you can do breaking news, but I don't...
The Guardian did one where they followed someone's path from Syria to Sweden, and I think it was the same template as that one. And they tracked through maps as well.
But again, it's not a breaking story that
yeah.
you know, people are at at the train station trying to get to Germany. It's sort of like a documentary process or a long feature format. It's a feature, so it's different to news. It's certainly not breaking news. It's a more magazine feature.
And what do you think the advantages are over a written story or a documentary? Where do you think it sits? Kind of in
I think it's a completely different genre. I think there is place for a written story. You can take it, if it's especially in print, you sit down and read it on the tube. This is really going to sound geeky, but apparently there is research of sitting back experience and leaning forward experience from the audience. And sitting back experience is when somebody gave you something, you need to spend that hour watching it or that whole length reading it. You can't stop at any point. While leaning forward experience, you can kind of come to it and go away from it. You can spend a little bit today, kind of like it, then do again tomorrow. You don't. It's not a chronological. You can come in and out of it at any time, and that's what keeps people wanting to do it. Because sometimes you don't want to spend an hour thinking about horrid, sad things that are happening in the world. You maybe have 10 minutes for it today, but tomorrow you can come back. You don't have to devote your. I mean, time is expensive these days.
I think it's also a matter of distraction, because like if you're reading, like if you used to read, like checking out a lot of things, and you've got a really long text on your computer, then at one point your hand just goes to another
Exactly,
tab.
you want to check email.
And here you can go to different tabs within the story, so
Yeah.
maybe that's what keeps you inside, because you can do that distraction within
Exactly.
the environment.
And if you're not doing a serious story, if it's a commercial something or the other, it's very attractive for advertisers because it's a contained product. I mean, they can brand it. It's sort of in its own right, a product in its own right. So that's again, I mean, if it's obviously nobody's going to sponsor anything drilling in the Arctic, you know what I mean. But if it's something light-hearted, you might get money for it. Anyone else?
What about the software you mentioned? Is it very expensive?
No, that's the beauty of it as well. We can get a demo version for free, but it lasts like 2 weeks or something.
It's not open source.
Hmm? It is open source.
It is open.
Yeah, the license for it is around €500 a year, and they update it all the time. So for €500, between 5 and 6, I forgot now. Last one was 500. You have it licensed for a year with all the updates. If you want updates next year, you buy it again. But if you don't want updates and you're happy with that, you just paid it once and that's it. I mean, compared to you'll probably pay €500 for a coder to spend a day with you. So it's probably a bargain. So no, it's not that expensive. That's why they did it. They basically saw a niche that they kind of, I mean, it's not going to be rock and roll, but it's, look at it. I mean, some of the stuff people do is pretty cool.
I just saw on the website that they have an education version for students and university staff, which is only £35
There you go.
for, I think, once.
There you go. Yeah, 35. Even better. Any more questions? Cool. Well, look, thank you very much for coming, and hope you enjoyed it. And please do tell us if you make something cool. We'd love to see it.